Today we will focus on the role of media writing in this controversial presidential campaign. We'll focus specifically on bias or newspaper slant and the role of the reporter. Some key takeaways for you will be the following: to understand the role of gatekeeper, recognize how a single event could generate more than one story, experience and understand the role of objectivity in news reporting, and to critically analyze or deconstruct two different media messages. As we consider news coverage, we need to think about four specific topics: the role of the reporter, public perception of journalism ethics, the objectivity myth, and how media choices reinforce our own personal biases. Before we start to analyze the political messages mediated through mass media, we must figure out who makes these decisions. Who decides what news is fit to print? Is it the journalist? Is it the news organization? Well, it's both. And you may wonder, how do they decide what is newsworthy? Journalism follows an unwritten code of ethics, and although there is no binding contract, they follow a few basic rules. Journalists use conventions such as the inverted pyramid, careful attribution of sources, limited adjectives and adverbs in order to turn events into news stories. Assuming that we follow these rules, it ensures that we have an objective tone in our stories. Many believe the system in place is a good one, though. Journalists are able to police themselves, and the content is a barometer for what is considered ethically favorable. We're seeing a shift, though. Basically, partisanship is trumping neutrality. For instance, let's talk about fact-checking. Not the candidates, the reporters. And that's what convergence has brought on the scene for reporters. Convergence is a double-edged sword, though. Convergence allows reporters to act quickly, to report the news, to trump other news broadcasts. It also means that haste can make waste, and oftentimes in the rush to be the first on the scene, errors are made. The advantage to convergence is that when news is reported online, reporters are able to update the news stories and make those corrections. The other side of that argument is that errors are out there and consumers often don't know when they've been updated. Ultimately, this opportunity to correct on the fly is a good one. Some argue, though, that that has made reporters lazy. That takes us to the public perception of journalism today. Recently, it has been reported that Americans' trust in mass media sank to a new low, specifically in their efforts to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly, according to a recent Gallup poll. 32% of Americans have a great deal or a fair amount of trust, which is down 8 points from last year. With Republicans, this number sank from 32% to 14%, and we notice this shift too in younger media consumers. And although the public's perception is negative, journalism practice has never been more scrutinized. Bloggers and social media sites act as a watchdog of the Fifth Estate. The internet has created a place where anyone can call attention to journalistic irregularities. What about plagiarism? Sure, the web makes it easier to find and steal other people's work, but it also makes it easier to get caught. So you may think that our media coverage these days is more biased than it's ever been, especially as we watch Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump duke it out on stage. But the question remains, what is objectivity, and is it a myth? When I first heard my Journalism 101 professor say to me that objectivity was a myth, I was shocked. I couldn't believe this. It went against everything I had been trained to do as a reporter. But the idea is that once you subjectively choose a picture, write a headline, and gather the content to support that, you're creating a story. And that sounds to me more like literature than news gathering. The question is, how do we ensure that that subjectivity doesn't internalize our own bias? And we're seeing students particularly struggle with that as they work to cover the upcoming presidential election. Some people believe that objectivity is in the First Amendment, or that it's some sort of ethical pillar to journalism. And while many journalists would argue that it's ingrained in all of us, we have to understand that oftentimes our own personal biases leak into that coverage. Instead, what we need to do is be more conscientious about the sources we choose and the outlets we choose to consume. We know that we often we gravitate to news sources that confirm our own beliefs. This is really obvious because we have our favorite 5 stations that we consume every day. This is a natural habit of consumers. It's no secret that birds of a feather flock together. So what do we do about this? What do we do about the fact that our media consumption is basically affected by our own personal biases? People like the excitement of arguing with other people's opinions, but it's much more comfortable when you are situated around other people who have the same opinions as you. But in today's media coverage, it's almost comical at times when you see 2 news organizations cover the same news story and get completely different results. Let's review news video from 2 different news agencies covering the same news story about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as they prepare for the first presidential debate last month.
Depending on whom you believe, Hillary Clinton is either taking time off to do debate prep, hiding from the media because of various scandals, sitting on a relatively big lead in the polls, or all of the above. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is covering the Clinton campaign tonight.
New polling suggests Hillary Clinton has lost some of her DNC convention bounce, but still leads Donald Trump among key voting blocs. A new Monmouth survey has Clinton leading Trump by 7 points among likely voters. 7% supporting Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson, and 2% for the Green Party's Jill Stein. What could potentially shake up this race is the upcoming presidential debates, and top Clinton campaign officials are predicting Trump will go for broke as a last best opportunity.
Basically have a psychopath running for president. I mean, he meets the clinical definition.
And Pluff says Trump presents a challenge.
Well, it is going to be difficult because you're going to have to prepare for many different Trumps. You know, kind of like well-behaved, modest Trump. I doubt we'll see that. You know, kind of off-the-rails Trump. A Trump who doesn't prepare for anything. And apparently, you know, based on reports, that's how they're doing it. You just don't know what he's going to say.
Senior Clinton aides called Trump a formidable adversary, quite comfortable on stage due to his time as a highly successful TV personality, and the Democratic nominee is described as intense in her preparation. Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Fallon said about Clinton, quote, "She feels like it is a proving ground that this is a job interview."
So he's the unpredictable X factor. She is the scripted statist Hillary Clinton that, that basically needs to memorize lines.
There will undoubtedly be debate questions about the ongoing controversy over the close ties between the Clinton Foundation and the State Department during her time as secretary. The new Monmouth survey says 54% believe Clinton gave special treatment to big donors of the Clinton Foundation, with only 26% saying that she did nothing out of the ordinary. The interim head of the DNC said yesterday, it's no big deal.
Someone who's a donor, somebody who's an activist saying, I want access, I want to come into a room and I want to meet people. We often criminalize behavior that is normal, and I don't see what the smoke is.
A super PAC backing Clinton, Priorities USA, says it's pledged $3.5 million focused on efforts like boosting turnout among Latino and Asian American voters in Florida, Nevada, and Colorado. Some of that money will go to a group specializing in driving millennial voter turnout, as well as trying to maintain African American support. Heading into the home stretch, money is being directed toward the ground game. Brett?
All right, Mike, thank you.
For nearly half the clip, they talk about how Trump is a formidable adversary to Clinton and what he's been doing to prep for the debates. In this next clip, I want you to compare the amount of time spent on each candidate.
The first general election debate is now just weeks away, set for September 26th at Hofstra University out on Long Island here in New York. Trump and Hillary Clinton will meet again on October 9th at Washington University in St. Louis. They always have one debate there, it seems. And finally, October 19th at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. So what can we expect from these 2 candidates as they prepare to take the stage? Well, in an interview with the Washington Post, Sam Nunberg, a former Trump advisor, said not only does he want 100 million viewers, he wants to be a showstopper at the Roman Coliseum, the main event at WrestleMania. And perhaps that WrestleMania comparison comes from Donald Trump taking on the WWE's Vince McMahon back in 2007. Take a look. Jeb Bush might be having some flashbacks watching that, too. Joining me now is Republican strategist and MSNBC analyst Ben Ginsburg, a veteran presidential debate advisor, and Liz Smith, Democratic strategist who advised former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley in his presidential campaign. So, Ben Ginsburg, let me start with you. We played a montage there of Donald Trump versus the Republican field, a lot of memorable moments in those Republican debates this year. And it was Donald Trump trying to dismiss their attacks with a put down, with an insult, with sort of a very alpha line of attack. In a one-on-one debate with Hillary Clinton, does that same strategy work?
Probably not, and I think they're obviously aware of that. I mean, what you've seen with Donald Trump's positions on immigration, his outreach to the African American and Hispanic communities, give you a hint that there is going to be sort of a different approach to these upcoming debates.
And part of that, I guess, is, I mean, the challenge of any campaign and any candidate approaching these debates is to study up on the issues so you're not blindsided. You can give the 90-second, 2-minute answer on whatever policy question you're thrown at. It really doesn't seem that reading the briefing books has been Donald Trump's strength. Do you think his campaign can get him to do that?
Oh, I think so. I mean, every candidate before a debate has a moment of recognition that they are out there flapping by themselves on a not very strong limb and a very stiff breeze, having to answer questions in front of 60 million people. So candidates do tend to study up. But it's also important to remember there are two parts to any debate prep. One is the substances you mentioned, but there is a performance art to these debates, and that's different for the primary debates than the general election debates.
As you may have noticed, each news outlet has a different story to tell. And this kind of bias is also spilling into social media coverage as well. The Wall Street Journal created a mock Facebook feed comparing liberal and conservative feeds side by side. To demonstrate how reality may differ for different Facebook users, the Wall Street Journal created two feeds, one blue and the other red. If a source appears in the red feed, a majority of the articles shared from the source were classified as very conservatively aligned, according to the 2015 Facebook survey. For the blue feed, a majority of each source's articles aligned very liberal. These aren't intended to resemble actual individual news feeds. Instead, they are a rare side-by-side look at real conversations from different perspectives. A recent analysis of the 2016 primary races by the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy found that media coverage can make or break a candidate. But why the bias? Are journalists out to engage in this vast conspiracy? No. The truth is, journalists like a good story. And in this case, Trump had the more novel narrative. So he got more coverage. What happened was the press's extensive coverage on this horse race has not allowed for a substantive coverage of the issues. And that's been a real critique for consumers. In this chart by Pew Research Center, we found that news outlets have a very even distribution of viewers. Most reported that they got their news from local TV and Facebook. But still, most rely heavily on network and cable news. 44% said they got their news from CNN in the past week. You'll notice that Fox's audience leans conservative, while CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC, their audiences often lean left. Newspapers? Well, the New York Times and USA ranked highest, but their numbers still didn't compare to those of TV networks. Today we reviewed the role of the reporter, the perception of the news, the objectivity myth, and how our natural biases reinforce our media consumption. While we can't change the structure of media ownership or impact the training of journalists, we can vote with our media consumption. I encourage my students to always seek out an alternative point of view. You saw a lot of graphs today that charted people's consumption habits based on their own ideological viewpoints. Where do you fall on that chart? I encourage you to break out of that and try something new on. You never know, it might create some new valuable insight and offer you a fresh perspective.